satisfied with that, both to have some perspective on it, but also let it, be perceive it as insufficient because the times demand more. I mean, we're in many respects in worse situations than we were even 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think building upon what we have is crucial. And I think that that when I see something that I think is inhibiting the building of that project, if we had 50 more Cori Bushes or Jamal Bowmans or AOCs in Congress, things would be very, very different. And like I think that what Jayapal is doing with the Progressive Caucus is relevant. I think it's important. I mean, before it's been just like you pay $4,000 and you get the branding, and they are trying to restructure that so that you can get a smaller group of people, but who are more cohesive. And I support that project, and I don't want it undercut because someone has a theory that I think is arguably dubious.
So my perspective is that to build on what we have already, we have to make sure that 20 years from now, or whenever it is that we finally have whatever the quotient of progressives there need to be for us to start making any kind of basic demands to catch us up with the rest of the developed world, the original progressives are still progressive, and not like Nancy Pelosi, who was widely perceived to be a genuine progressive 30 years ago when she was championing Medicare for all, and she was asking why we didn't have a floor vote. And to keep people honest, it's not about individually deciding to be corrupt, but there is a real thing called institutional creep that people have been studying for generations. And when you have power, what ends up happening is you think, wow, I have the ability to deliver for my constituents this thing tomorrow. And that is real. And those are real people who need a real thing. And you are constantly negotiating the trade-off between, do I hold out for this thing that may or may not come down the line, or do I settle and deliver this real tangible benefit from the people who are looking me at my face in my district every day? And the reason that I disagree with Dore's approach is because I think it's important to point out that it's not about individually deciding to sell out, which is what people can take away from calling someone a sellout, and more about the institutional creep that I just described. But
and that dilemma that you just outlined,
and that dilemma, which is legitimate. But what I do think is useful about Dore's framing and the energy that he's bringing to this is that constructively, if you are behaving the same way as a person who did literally sell out, because you are waiting whether or not to take a risk or not take a risk in a way, in a way that leads you to the same outcome every single time, then at a certain point, does it matter what's going on in your heart or your head? Like, I think it does matter to people because we like AOC. I like AOC. I've interviewed AOC many times. I think that she has, interpersonally, I'm inspired by her. I think a lot of us feel strongly positively about AOC. But I also think I also think it's fair to want to hold her feet to the fire.
I agree.
And I think there's room for Jimmy Dore. I think there's room for Kyle Kalinske, who's like, hey, I'm the guy who started the organization that got you elected. And we didn't intend for you to take this kind of lackadaisical approach. The whole point of Justice Democrats was to have someone who was oppositional, who was willing to burn out and be a one-term congressperson if it meant putting these ideas on the map. And I think it's fair to have someone who's more like me. I think there's to have someone to have more like Tim Black's approach, and on and on and on until you get someone, some folks who are saying, hey, I like you, AOC, but I'm going to push you gently. But someone has to make you afraid. And that's where the Tea Party on the right, I think, gets it a little bit more right. There have to be people who they know are going to embarrass them a little bit to get them to, and you can disagree about this particular tactical moment. I'm not talking about that. But I think, generally speaking, the left isn't willing to do anything that would, quote-unquote, hurt the people that we have elected, including Joe Biden, which is why we're not seeing elected representatives even in the squad saying things like, why isn't Joe Biden delivering on Medicare for all? Why, or things that he can do by himself, like student debt cancellation. They'll say, I want to cancel student debt, but they won't say, Joe Biden could do this and he won't. Put the pressure on him, right? And so that's the kind of adversarial attitude people are wanting more. That's my main complaint.
I agree. I mean, I agree in terms of your broad point, and I just think that I think that it is, and it's situational, and I think, you know, I don't make an assessment of it, what's in AOC's heart. I don't, you know, like, I don't really care, like, what about politicians, like, if they're nice or not nice, or if they're sincere or not sincere.
Doesn't matter.
Like, I perceive them as tools, as instruments. And, but there are times where it's, like I say, I'm not going to use my phone. I could hammer in a nail with this, but I'm going to break it. And I'm not saying that this would necessarily, you know, break AOC, but I'm saying that there is a calculation at times where it's like, is using this tool to do this worth it in terms of the outcome? And in this situation,
that would have been broken. What do you imagine? I mean that sincerely, like in good faith. What do you imagine the negative consequences for AOC and the squad? I want to broaden it because it's not all on AOC. I don't think it's fair to put it all on AOC. But what do you think the negative consequences would have been?
Well, I think there were negative consequences by the way that this was handled.
No. If they had gone ahead and said yes, let's force a vote, everyone's in agreement.
From their perspective, yeah. Like what? I mean, I don't have a full sense of, from their perspective, what they would perceive the cost to be. If they, but also, don't just make it just about force the vote, because I think there are some things that I would argue. I mean, personally, for me, like, I would like them to have to get rid of Nancy Pelosi.
Me too.
That's a different strategy, though, than force the vote.
No,
right?
I always argued it in the alternative. I always said in the alternative. To me, I wanted them to make so many demands that were so big that, frankly, they would be forced to say no. That would then spotlight how useful the demands are at the same time as giving them an excuse to vote out Nancy Pelosi. That was always my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but I think that from their perspective, you know, I think AOC paid a price in leading the charges to primary people. That's why
she have not primary people?
Huh?
Do you think she shouldn't have primary people?
No, I think she should have. No, I think she should have. I mean, I think for me, from my perspective, it is, because this is more long-term, I want more progressives in Congress. And I'm not convinced that I don't think that her seat on the Energy and Commerce Committee, even though that would be super valuable, would be worth trading, you know, 2 or 3 other seats that she's probably responsible for. And those 2 or 3 seats could translate into 5 or 6 next cycle.
You know what's funny to me about the seat stuff, by the way? And I'm going to ask your opinion on this as, like, you know, a professional, a political professional. Why is it, like, we all kind of accept that doing something to, like, rock the Queen, to upset Queen Pelosi, can result in these really punitive outcomes, right? So we all kind of accept that Nancy Pelosi is giving appointments out based on who pleases her as opposed to who would be best, who would in the position or help the Democratic Party. Why isn't that we, as media figures, reframe that to make it so that there's a political cost for Nancy Pelosi basically choosing to hurt some of the most popular members in Congress over, like, some stupid peccadillo of her?
I mean, I've certainly attempted to do that in terms of the fact that she controlled all the subpoena power of all the committees in a way that was unprecedented and prevented people from investigating Donald Trump. I did that in terms of, like, when she, I don't know that I ever stopped, but the first, people forget that they unveiled H.R. 1 when they won in 2018, and they stepped all over it by attacking Ilhan Omar. And I still am talking about it, obviously, and that was 2 years ago. And I think, you know, in the instance of the vote with AOC, that was actually a secret vote by the nominating committee, by the slating committee. So there's 50 members of Congress, and she got wiped out. I mean, it was 40.
The discourse is so much, and I don't mean you in particular, but generally the discourse is like, Pelosi will punish X person for this. Pelosi will punish, and it's like, if we're talking, part of the power, all of the power that the squad has is that they're enormously popular, not just with the left, but with all of, like, kind of the yes queen liberals who like a beautiful, stylish, brown woman on the cover of their magazine, whether it's Ilhan or AOC or whomever. So there should be, sometimes I wish in this moment, I think the thing that hurt me the most is that I wish the squad members recognize that their political capital lay with us, not with them, and lay with the broader public even beyond the left. And that's a real kind of power that, like, I dare Nancy Pelosi to come outwardly at AOC. Right now, if she's sticking the inside game, with the inside game, then Pelosi's always going to win. But if she comes out into the public, that's where AOC has real power, and she's been so reluctant to do that.
If you look at the reporting on that committee, on the slating committee vote, all the reporting has a line somewhere in one of the reports on it that was this vote public, the outcome would probably have been very different. They wouldn't have voted for Rice. They would have probably voted for AOC because they would have been afraid of that. But, you know, the problem is that the vast majority of Americans do not pay attention to everything that we're talking about. And they're not going to get invested in this type of procedural stuff. And so
pay attention to an AOC went to Hunt's Point yesterday during an inauguration and managed to steal press from the inauguration, and her interview with Chris Cuomo about it is like the #1 clicked news clip on Twitter today. So when AOC decides to give something attention, it gets attention, which is part of what the core of what this force the vote thing is all about.
But like you said earlier, the assessment that she's making is it going to allow me to draw attention to maybe these labor struggles? Is it going to allow me to draw attention to raising funds, going on and playing Among Us and raising $500,000 for the people in her district? Is it going to allow me to do X, Y, and Z these things if I have a showdown to the death with Nancy Pelosi over
over anything? Name your thing, Sam. It could be anything.
Okay.
Let's be creative for a second. Forget the Medicare for all.
Let me ask you this. Well, let me put it this way. I don't know, but I speculate that if AOC thought that if she was to deny Nancy Pelosi the vote, that Medicare for all would necessarily happen, I suspect she would do that. I think the issue is like, am I going to risk this for something that is got, whether I think there's a 10% chance of this happening or 90% chance of that happening will determine how I assess the cost-benefit analysis of that.
Yeah, I hear you, Sam, but I'm asking you to play a mind game, because I hear you saying that you don't think a floor vote is worth it, and I do, but we're going to agree to disagree. I'm asking you, in the entire panoply of things that exist in the world, things that are needed, things asked that we have to make. Bernie Sanders is obviously pushing this executive, emergency Medicare for all plan for the COVID, which, a lot of these are tough sells because of Biden and Democrats, right? These are not Republicans, not tough sells because Republicans. Student debt cancellation, Biden can do it like this. They're all pretending like they got their thumbs up their butt like they can't do it. Like, we all know. So, thought experiment. It's let's say it's end of November when this all started percolating, and you have the ability to frame this in any way you want. Would you say, yes, withhold a vote from Nancy Pelosi in exchange for what would you demand, and do you think that would make a difference in terms of like how much you got behind this? Because this situation is going to rise again. The margins in the House are so slim that it's not going to involve Nancy Pelosi. It's not going to have the same force of threat for that reason. But there are going to be a lot of opportunities for the left to say, we're not going to go along and get along unless you give me something. It won't get as much publicity. It won't be as big an impact because, again, my personal view is that Nancy Pelosi and her enormous unpopularity was really the hook that got you a lot of the scintillating coverage, including on the right-wing media, right? Right-wingers hate Pelosi. If Fox News is talking about Pelosi, and MSNBC feels compelled to defend Pelosi. Pelosi's on the TV giving interviews. Pelosi is terrible in interviews. We also saw that horrible clip that came out of the Hillary Clinton campaign. And the whole thing just becomes a rat race that inures the benefit of the left and Medicare for all. True. But you're designing this from scratch. You have an opportunity to admit, what would you ask for? Do you think that there are things that would have been worth using the political capital?
like what would have been worth the what would have been a good ask? I mean, honestly, like I think committee positions are hugely important, and I don't know. I honestly don't. I mean, I'm not being clear. I don't know how much. When that vote comes 43-13 or whatever on the Energy and Commerce, or at the very least, like Katie Porter getting that waiver. Other people have gotten waivers. They could have gotten that waiver. She got squeezed a little bit. Maybe I would get rid of seniority on committees as an organizing principle, because that acts against the interests of progressives. Because
we don't get Bernie, right? Then we lose out on our Bernie.
Well, I mean, you're in the House, right? But
is that seniority system still in the House? Because I thought they abolished that.
I'm pretty sure it is. I would get rid of it in the Senate too, to be honest with you. I would have liked to see Durbin not get judiciary, but you're right. Bernie might have had a problem in that situation. But I think anything that can get newer members more power, I think is good, because I feel like Nancy Pelosi has been leader of the Democrats for almost 20 years, and there's been like maybe a half a dozen, at least, Republican leaders in the House, and I think that is shocking.
Yeah, it really is.
And I think I would look for things that are structural, that will, because I am of the mind that the left does not have much power right now, and I would look for things that would enhance that power. And maybe it would be like we want a specific person in the DCCC, so that the resources are deployed differently in terms of who gets reelected. Off the top of my head, I can just say, to answer it off the top of my head in a general sense, I would look for more structural things.
Okay.
Because I want to build that power over time, because, like I say, it just gets back to, use my phone to nail in, a nail. Like, I could probably get that nail into this, wood desk with my phone, but then the phone is done, and now all I've done is that one nail. And I would
I asked you, Sam, what you thought that what are the concrete losses that the squad would accrue if they were to withhold a vote for Nancy Pelosi? And so if you're saying that what you really would ask them to hold it out for is committee chairs, committee seats, and they went ahead and withheld the vote in order to get committee seats, well then, by definition, they couldn't even take away committee seats from them, right? Because they would have gotten them as part of their campaign. So what is it that we're so afraid of them losing? Because for me, it's not that I was so sure of the benefit, but there was just no downside to the thing. They already talk shit about Medicare for all. There's already billions of dollars of advertising against Medicare for all. The media is already against it. It can't get any worse than this. So what is the downside to trying?
Well, I'm not convinced, frankly, that 5 freshman or sophomore Congress people, or 6 or whatever, preventing Pelosi from getting the seat. I know you're convinced that people that somehow, despite the media imbalance and despite the conventional wisdom.
Don't talk about the upsides, because I don't know about the upsides either. My question right now is, what are the downsides?
I'm saying the downsides. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in that standoff, I'm not convinced that they wouldn't pay a massive price in terms of their popularity. I think that there may be a lot of people who turn against them, who are somewhat supportive, and to the extent that they have, I understand the calculus that they have power, presumably, holding over Pelosi, but I'm not convinced that Pelosi wouldn't have just called their bluff. You say, okay, you can be responsible for freezing the Democratic House. Good luck.
Just like the Republicans have no problem.
They have a different constituency, don't they? The Republicans have Republican constituency.
I think that we have a constituency that wants that kind of fight and to be activated as well, but the Democratic Party doesn't court them. We talk constantly on the left about there being 40 million people who don't vote, and all of these working class people who don't vote, and all of these working people, longtime labor families that used to be Democrats for generations, and now they've went ahead and voted for Trump, the Obama to Trump voter. We talk and talk and talk about these people, and never once does it seem to occur to us that maybe if we acted with a little more tenacity, maybe if we acted like we were fighting for people in the way that people thought Donald Trump was, the way he presented himself as being, that we could actually grow our ranks, that we could have more persuasive power, that doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 30 years of neoliberalism ain't it.
I agree, but I just don't think that holding up a vote for a vote that's going to lose in the House.
No, stand up. In this scenario, I'm asking you to design your perfect ask. It can be anything you want. Ask for anything. That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
I mean, I can tell you what I think would be the good ask, but what I cannot tell you is exactly how I would assess, if I was one of those members of Congress, what the chances that Nancy Pelosi, I mean, I don't know. But it's not inconceivable to me that there was an attempt to leverage more, and Nancy Pelosi goes, "Go fuck yourself."
Right, but it's not leverage.
You want to be out there? Good luck. Good luck with what's going on out there.
But you're not doing it, and until you publicly withhold the vote. Like the point of this, the force of the vote is not some backroom deal that they always are doing and always negotiating. The whole persuasive value of force of vote is that they publicly humiliate Nancy Pelosi by not voting for her.
Your perception is that they're going to humiliate Nancy Pelosi and not themselves.
Yes, they're going to, no, regardless of what happens to the squad, Nancy Pelosi is humiliated if it's a public knowledge that she wasn't able to secure a vote for Speaker after how many ever years that she's been in this seat.
You don't think it's going to be...
Upstart squad members declined to vote for her.
You don't think it's...
That is a huge story.
You think it's going to be impossible for the Democratic establishment to alienate Democrats from figures like Cori Bush and AOC or
Hang on.